Thank you all for joining. I wanted to start with just a simple question. What would it look like if your organization wasn't just reacting to change, but actually prepared for it? That's the question behind everything we are going to explore together over the next few days. My name is Tara Peitzer, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Giveffect. And I'll be your host for Next 2026. Next is brought to you by Giveffect, and it was created for nonprofit leaders and teams who are done operating in reaction mode. Because the reality is, most organizations are navigating constant change right now. Shifting donor behavior, evolving technology, limited time and capacity, and in the middle of all of that, you're still expected to move your mission forward. This summit is a space to step out of that day-to-day pressure and think more intentionally about what comes next. Over the next few afternoons, you'll hear from nonprofit peers who are rethinking how they fundraise, building systems that actually support their work, and leading their teams with more clarity and alignment. This is not about theory or big ideas that are hard to apply. It's real conversations, real decisions, real examples you can take back to your organization. So whether you join us for one session or stay all 3 afternoons, our goal is simple, that you leave with a clearer path forward and a few practical ideas you can start acting on right away. Now a quick word about Giveffect. For those who may not be as familiar, Giveffect is an all-in-one nonprofit platform that brings together the tools organizations need to operate effectively, including donor management, volunteer management, CRM, marketing, and more. Our goal is to help nonprofits run more smoothly, improve operational efficiency, strengthen financial stability, and ultimately further their mission. You'll hear real examples of Giveffect in use throughout the summit. And on day 3, our tech spotlight will take you behind the scenes to show you how these approaches are set up, with, of course, time for your questions. Now, a few quick housekeeping notes for the summit. We'll save about 10 minutes at the end of each session for audience questions. Please be sure to submit your questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And please do continue to engage in the chat as well. We are recording the summit, but encourage you to join live to get the most out of it. And lastly, right after the keynote, I'll be sharing 2 announcements you won't want to miss. And with that, let's dive into the keynote. To kick things off, we wanted to start with that bigger question. Not just how we keep up, but how we build organizations that are actually prepared for what comes next. Because the future is not something that happens to nonprofits. It's something that leaders actively shape. And there's no one better to guide us into that conversation than Trista Harris. Trista is the president of FutureGood and a philanthropic futurist who works with organizations across the sector to help them move from reacting to change to intentionally designing for the future. Today, she's going to share how nonprofits can think more long-term, stay adaptable, and turn uncertainty into something that can actually work with. Trista, we're so glad you're here. Welcome. I'll turn it over to you.
Tara, thank you so much. Hey, everybody. So excited to be here with you today. I'm Trista Harris. I'm a philanthropic futurist and president of FutureGood. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to the FutureGood website. There's a button that says Let's Connect, and clicking that button will give you a free copy of the FutureGood book, which teaches you how to use all of the tools that I'll be talking about today. So I bet many of you have not met a philanthropic futurist before, so I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. I have worked in nonprofits and foundations since I was 15 years old. I had my first job running a social justice foundation in Minneapolis. I was super excited. I was a couple months into the job, and got a call from our investment manager. And he said, don't panic, which is like the perfect time to panic. Our endowment had dropped about 50% almost overnight. This was in 2008 with the stock market crash. We were a community foundation that was fundraising dollars to give away. And we tried to be a good grant maker that made multi-year grants, which meant that we had actually overcommitted for the dollars that we had available. That is not a good place to be as a foundation. I was positive we were going to shut down, and I had no good strategies except for crushing anxiety, which was not serving me very well. And so around that time, I ran into a book about how to use futurism to get a business advantage during times of crisis. And I was like, this is a time of crisis. So read the book from front to back and realized those are the exact tools that our grantees needed in this moment to be able to get through this crisis. And so we didn't have dollars to give away, so we were sure doing a lot of technical assistance and helping our grantees envision the future after the financial crisis. And in the year and a half that followed, our grantees had 10 legislative wins. They were all doing community organizing work. That was the most in our organization's history. They had wins on things like alternative teacher certification to diversify our state's teaching force. We got a first in its country homeowners bill of rights to deal with the mortgage foreclosure crisis. And we got marriage equity in the state of Minnesota. And so it lit this spark in me that if you put the tools of futurism in the hands of people that do good for a living, they can absolutely transform the world. What I thought was going to happen next was that I was going to find all of the nonprofit futurists and just work with them. And then I realized that that didn't exist. So I became trained as a futurist. I went to Oxford and studied scenario planning. I went to the Institute for the Future and Singularity University to get on top of future of technology and how it impacts people that are doing good. And back in 2018, started FutureGood. We work with foundations and nonprofits around the country and around the world with a type of strategic planning that helps people anchor themselves 30 to 50 years in the future. We also teach people how to become futurists. So each of you in the work that you are doing, you may not call it futurism, but every time you start a new program, every time you propose a new public policy, it is because you are working to transform what the future looks like. And so at FutureGood, what we do is make those tools accessible and easy to access. I'm going to give you just a little bit of context of this moment that we're living in right now. There is a saying, it's meant to be a curse. May you live in interesting times. So we are living in a time of rapid change and decline, a time of collapse of systems, government cuts, school shootings. We're passing the tipping point on climate change. We are definitely living in interesting times. This is also an incredibly difficult time for folks that work in the social sector. So I work closely with a number of foundations and nonprofits, and what I hear from their staff is, this is the hardest work of my career. People have tried to suck it up since 2020, and if I just push a little bit harder, if I just do a little bit more, things will get better, and they have absolutely hit the wall about what that looks like. It feels very, very bleak out there. But I am an unreasonable optimist, and I believe that another future is possible. I also know that the largest systemic changes happen during times of crisis. I believe that we are 5 years from utopia, that all of these collapses of systems that are happening around the country and around the world are actually the things that create the space to build the new. And I think that our sector is at the center of building what's possible and what's next. And I think that a futurism lens helps you do that. So we're living in a time of exponential change, which means that change gets faster and more intense as you go. We are not going to go back to a time where things are calm. This just happens to be the point in human history that we've been dropped in. And it means that we need to actually anchor ourselves in that future state to help us manage all of this volatility. Our brains are made for us to live in a village of 50 people and everything is within walking distance. It is not made for us to have these devices that connect us to people around the world and to constantly be in this go, go, go mode. So it is not surprising that people are so stressed out during this pace of change. The rapid change happens for a lot of reasons. Technology is a piece of it. AI is really transforming everything about human existence in this moment. We also have political changes that are happening. We have structural changes that are happening in the world. All of these things together are what are leading us to exponential change. So now is the time to future-proof your organizations. For me, I went to grad school for nonprofit management. I learned a bunch of tools that served me really well until 2020. And that's when that exponential curve started to point up this way, where that change was getting faster and faster and more intense. And so we actually need different tools to be able to move us forward as we're moving through exponential change. To prepare for all of this, what organizations need is a clear future-focused strategy so that you can make smarter decisions today while leveraging change and all of this volatility that we have to actually get you to your ideal future a whole lot faster. The result of being able to do that are stronger, more resilient organizations that can create lasting impact. There's just three really critical steps that you need to take to future-proof your organizations. The first one is to pick your point on the horizon. I talk to many organizations, and people say, yeah, we're all working in the same direction. We know what our mission is. But if you poke just a little bit, you realize that that vision of the future is slightly different. So there's a saying, we can send a man to the moon. How come we can't solve poverty? Well, I know if a man is on the moon, but when you say solve poverty, do you mean for families? Do you mean for individuals? Do you mean in the United States? Do you mean the federal poverty line? Do you mean a living wage? What is it that you mean? And in your organizations, if everybody doesn't have that exact same picture of the future, it means all your efforts in the present are diffused because everybody's working on a slightly different vision of the future. And so I encourage organizations to have a picture of 30 to 50 years in the future. If you are 100% successful in meeting your mission, what is different in your community or different in the world as a result of that? And if you turn that lens around onto your organization, what would you be doing in that moment that that future was true? So picking that point on the horizon is the most critical thing that you can do organizationally to get to your ideal future. The next part is to adapt faster. So at this point in time, the idea of a 5-year plan is hilarious. So in 2020, I worked with a number of organizations who needed a brand new strategic plan. They had just completed a plan. Lots of organizations had plans that started in 2020, because what a great time to start a new strategic plan. But the world changed around them and the plan couldn't hold. And so what we need is that long-term point on the horizon that we're working towards, but the ability to be super adaptable during that plan. And so you need to pair that really adaptable work plan. We encourage organizations to have a picture of that 30 to 50 years of success and then have a work plan for the next 3 years. And so in that 3-year work plan, the first year is super clear. You have a picture of every quarter. Here's who's doing what to get us to that long-term future. Years 2 and 3 are a little bit fuzzier. You have a picture of the actions that you're going to take, but you're not exactly sure what the conditions are going to look like in that moment. You also have a list of actions that are and beyond. So they are the other things that need to happen in the long-term future to get you to that 30-year vision. What happens when you have all those pieces laid out is that you then move into a process where every quarter you look back at what you've just accomplished and you look ahead to what's next. And you look at the actions that you have planned to get you closer to your ideal future. And you say, did these make sense given this moment in time? What are the things that took longer than we thought it was going to take? And this quarter, we need to continue to do those activities that we thought were going to be done. What are new opportunities that have showed up on the horizon? So maybe you have a new board member and you had a plan for a public policy change that you thought was going to take 10 to 15 years. You actually have the right people and the right timing in place to make that happen this year. You move that from the longer term plan into the shorter term plan. The other thing that I think is really helpful is we use something called a 12-week year, where for 12 weeks, our entire organization is focused on sprints on a handful of things. We're all kind of pushing in that same direction. These are things that we know will get us to that long-term future. And then we have a 13th week and in between those 12-week sprints. And during that 13th week, we pause. There's no external meetings. We're actually in our 13th week this week. And during that time, what we do is stop the external work and really dig internally and say, okay, what did we just learn in this last quarter? What did we figure out? What was harder than we thought it was going to be? What was easier than we thought it was going to be? And what's coming next? And is there learning that I need to do for this next sort of sprint that we have, one of my personal things is that I need to learn how to better use LinkedIn and some of the higher end capacities that they have for this next sprint that we have that is all about connection and relationship. And so that 13th week gives your team an opportunity to pause and to build the skills that they need for that next sprint, not to learn all of the things, but just to learn the next things that they need to know. The last thing that you need to do is harness volatility. A problem can be an opportunity if you know about it before it lands on your doorstep. So imagine you're an arts nonprofit, you're based in the city center, you host shows on the weekends, you have a really fantastic parking ramp, and you can use it for all of your shows, but during the week it's not being used. And so you sell hourly parking. It's a huge source of unrestricted revenue for your organization. And that's something that you just assume is going to continue moving forward. But what if suddenly Waymo's moved to your town, sort of self-driving rideshare services, and the cost of those Waymos is much cheaper than somebody taking an Uber or a Lyft into town. It's also a lot cheaper than somebody owning their own vehicle. And suddenly, lots of those office workers decide, I'm just going to take a Waymo in and I'm not going to pay for parking. And so you have this resource that suddenly isn't as useful. If you knew about that future trend before it actually happened, maybe you would repurpose that space. Maybe you would work with a local nonprofit and your parking ramp could be a homeless shelter. Maybe you would transform it into a semi-indoor hydroponic garden where people could have really hyper-local food. If you have futurism skills and you are able to understand what's coming around the corner, it helps you be more resilient organizationally, and you're not surprised when things land on your doorstep. Probably from 2015 on, I had a trend that I used to share called global pandemics are much more likely. And it had a picture of two people in an airport wearing masks. And there's a lot of reasons why there was going to be a global pandemic. Global travel is really inexpensive. We're encroaching on natural areas. There's a lot of reasons why that was possible. And so when COVID first started, and it became clear that that was going to be a pandemic, I realized that there were a ton of ripple effects that I had been paying a lot of attention to that were going to impact me and my family and my work. One of those things was about the future of work. And so I was in a super cool co-working space. And I went in and I said, hey, I want to cancel my lease. And they said, we have a 2-year waiting list. If you cancel your lease, you're going to get to the end of the list. You're not going to be able to move back in. If this is about that COVID thing, if they decide to do a lockdown, we'll refund your rent for 2 weeks. And I was like, nope, I absolutely do want to cancel. And so about 6 months later, a package accidentally got delivered to the co-working space. And I went in and the office was dark. Nobody was in there. There was a pile of mail that was taller than me. All of the staff had been laid off. And many, many folks were unable to cancel their leases because when it became clear that this trend was happening, they locked that down and said, no, everybody has to stay in your contract. So understanding future trends allows you to get ahead of curves and do the things that make the most sense for your organization. This traditional planning is failing us in this moment. So as I said before, I learned all about strategic planning. I learned all about the tools that you use to run nonprofit organizations when I was in grad school. And all of those tools worked very, very well until 2020 and until this exponential curve gets faster and faster. The challenge is that in traditional strategic planning, what we're doing is looking backwards at what we've already accomplished and then using that to estimate what we can do moving forward. It assumes that everything is linear and that it will be the same. And as we know, things are not the same. There is a ton of change that's happening around us all the time. One of the things that we do at FutureGood is help people use this 50-year frame, but often we work with very large foundations and very large nonprofits because it's an expensive process to have a team of futurists that's supporting you directly. What I deeply believe is that futurism tools are actually something that everybody in the social sector needs to learn, and that it shouldn't be that an outside futurist comes in and helps you be strategic and think about the long term every couple of years. I think it's something that each of us needs to be using all of the time. And so we created a tool called Future Proof that helps organizations use strategy and futurism tools and the way that we use it at FutureGood, but they build that capacity internally. And so your internal staff team becomes strategic and learns how to understand what are the trends that are going to impact the future of our work. What are the opportunities that are right around the corner that we need to pay attention to? And what are the challenges that we need to pay attention to as well? If you're interested in learning about Future Proof, you can go to the wearefuturegood.com website and dig in. We have cohorts of organizations that are learning together about how to build future-proof organizations. The intention with that 30 to 50-year vision is that everybody is aligned on that work. But we find for most of our clients that 30 to 50-year vision happens within 5 to 7 years. So you need a long runway to envision transformation and change. But once that vision is clear, it actually happens very, very, very quickly. And so for each of your organizations, how do you get super clear about what that ideal future looks like? And then how do you get folks aligned and how do you help them harness all of this chaos in this moment to help you get to a future that you can be super excited about? So we're going to open it up. First, I'm going to have a fireside chat with Tara, which I'm super excited about. But then we're going to open it up to your questions. And so make sure that you are thinking about questions that you have. I think we're collecting them in the chat. Add those questions there, and then we'll get back to those. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see each other, Tara.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Trista. I mean, there's so much there that I think people are already starting to reflect on. I mean, especially the idea that even in the middle of everything that's urgent, we still have a role in shaping what comes next. And I love the idea about your week 13. That's something I'd like to implement at Giveffect and for myself as well. So thank you so much for that. Um, Now, like Trista mentioned, I'd love to spend a few minutes just making this even more practical for everyone joining us today. And this is also, as Trista said as well, this is a really great time. If you have questions for Trista, get them in, as we'll be taking a few questions shortly. So just click on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and put those questions in there.
Perfect.
All right. So, as people were listening, I imagine some were thinking, this all makes sense, but I'm already stretched thin. So, how do you start thinking about the future when you're still dealing with everything that's urgent today? I mean, I know we talked about week 13, but could you elaborate more on how the all the attendees joining today can bring this back to their organizations and start?
I love it. So when I started FutureGood in 2018, I was sort of on the nonprofit and foundation conference circuit. And I would say, here's why future thinking is so important. And what people would often say is, I am so glad you are paying attention to the future. I am very busy with the present and I don't have any space for this. I think what happened in 2020 was an understanding that not knowing what the future could bring actually completely transforms your work in the moment, that we don't actually have the luxury to not think about the future. We have a responsibility, especially as nonprofit organizations. Community depends on us. And so we have to understand what's coming next. And I know in moments like this, people are like, yeah, okay, later. I will definitely, we've lost federal funding. There are challenges in our local community. There's a natural disaster. We can only focus on those things. What I will say very gently is if you don't have a picture of the future, it actually doesn't matter what you do in the present. There's a Alice in Wonderland quote that's like, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which direction you go to. And I think we have a lot of that in the sector where we like want to act, but we're diffusing our efforts. And so a long-term picture of the future allows you to figure out how to harness this volatility and move you forward. I work closely with a number of foundations, and in 2020, there was a lot of kind of circling because there were so many needs. It was like, well, what could we do and how could we show up? And I was working with a local foundation that does public health. And they were having a team meeting and really struggling with like, should we support food shelves? A lot of kids are not in school and they need access to food. Should we support small businesses because they're challenged in this moment? Where should we go? And I was like, you should do public health. We are in a public health crisis. You are experts in this thing. How do you harness this moment where there's such attention on public health to move towards a future that you can be really excited about? And so I encourage people not to spend all of your time on the future. That is my job. That's not what each of you need to be doing. But set aside 5% of your time for the future. Just a little bit of time, a couple hours a week. During that time, set Google alerts for yourself, future of early childhood education, future of housing, future of my city, whatever the things are that you care about, set those Google alerts. And when they come and you have that 5% time, read those articles and wonder, what does this mean for the future of our organization? What is possible? Share those ideas with other people within your organizations. We have a lot of clients that use Slack or Chatter or any sort of internal communications tools. And people will have a channel that's called Future Trends, and they will use that to be able to share those ideas within the organization. And I may have a perspective of what this trend might mean for the future of our organization, but our finance person might have a different idea, or our operations person, or a person in the education program may have a different idea. And all of us paying attention to those trends makes our organization a whole lot smarter about what's coming next.
I love the idea of setting aside just that 5% because I think all of us can do that, even though we're all so busy and stretched thin. And that also the idea of putting it on your calendar or setting those alerts, because that is something that's so easy to say, oh, I'll do that later. Oh, I'll push that off. But if I could make any recommendation to add, it would be put in your calendar and then write, like, do not move this, because I know myself, I would probably move it as something more pressing came up, but it's just as
Yeah.
pressing.
The future is not urgent until it is. And
Mhm.
so, really holding that time, it allows you to think about something that's possible, good or bad, before it actually hits you, which means that you're using the smarter part of your brain. So, when we're in crisis, you have the lizard part of your brain that's just like kind of scrambling and trying to figure out how to react. But when it isn't right in front of your face, you can actually be thoughtful because you have that distance. So 5% of time really helps with that.
I love that. I love that. Let's move on to the next question, which is also somewhat related, is when you talk about building a future-ready nonprofit, what does that actually look like day to day inside your organization? And how might that look different for a smaller team versus a larger organization?
Yeah, I think within many organizations, there is sort of one person on the team. It might be some of you on this call that are the future focused person. And so like you're the one that people are sometimes like, well, that's weird. I hadn't thought about that before. You need to build a culture where everybody is thinking about the future. One of the things that I like to use is like icebreaker questions during staff meetings. Questions like, what would the impact of our work be 50 years in the future? What would the impact of your particular role be 50 years in the future? Funny things like, what did you think would be invented by now but hasn't been invented? Just getting folks in this space where they are engaging with and thinking about the future. In popular media, the future is a thing to be feared. So we have like The Last of Us and Hunger Games and all of these other sort of Wall-E, where the planet is covered with garbage. Like we have all these pictures of the future that are very negative, but we don't engage with this idea of what if it all worked out? Like what are our biggest hopes for the future? And so I think a future-proof organization creates the space for that. When it comes to small organization versus big organization, we're entering a time where there's a lot of volatility, and we have these arcs that happen where an idea or a way of being or doing work, at the bottom nobody sort of believes it, at the top everybody does, and then that idea collapses. And for big organizations that are well served by current systems, they're going to hold on to that system until it fully collapses. For small organizations that aren't as well served by current systems, they're actually willing to jump onto the new and will be better served with all this volatility that's moving forward. And so I actually think that smaller organizations are better positioned to be resilient and ready for the future and to harness future trends and to get there a whole lot faster.
Oh, that's so interesting to think that smaller organizations actually have a bit of an advantage when it comes to this. That's definitely something to think about, especially for those smaller organizations who are always like, I need more resources, I need more time, but this is something that is to their advantage.
For
Um,
sure.
thank you. I think that um, that makes it just so much more concrete. Um, one pattern we see across nonprofits that come to Giveffect is that even when teams align on goals, their systems and their data are still disconnected. So that's fundraising, programs, finance, all working so hard, but not always seeing the same picture. I think you touched on this a little bit. From your perspective, how important is it to have the right systems and technology in place that bring that visibility together? And what actually changes when organizations do?
Yeah, I think it's critical for an organization to have the same picture about the present and the same picture about the future. And so when it comes to the same picture about the present, tools like Giveffect ensure that everybody has the same data and they're on the same page. And tools like Future Proof allow you to have the same vision of the future that you're moving towards. And when those two things are aligned, it means that you don't have diffused effort and it means that you don't have folks working cross purpose. I see that so often in organizations where people are using different data sources. And so they're in meetings and there's all this conflict, and it's because they have a different perspective of what that information means. Sometimes it's a values piece. So early in my career, I worked at a community foundation, and that meant that we were fundraising, and there was a new rule that said that you needed to give receipts only if it was a sort of, I don't know what the accounting word is, but like that the amount was significant enough. And so we were having a meeting to describe like what does significant mean. And a part of the data for that conversation was most of the gifts that came into the community foundation were for $100. And so in this meeting, there was all this back and forth because the accounting team was like, most of the gifts are $100. We should give a receipt at $101 and above. And the program team was saying, most of the gifts are $100. We should make the receipt at $100 and above. And it's because the values piece was different. So for the program team, in the fundraising team as well, they wanted to reach as many people as possible. For the accounting team, it was about efficiency. And we had an hour where we're just going back and forth and we're literally saying the exact same thing, but we have different values about that. And then somebody raised their hand and was like, what is more important, efficiency or connection? Let's decide. And once we were able to move forward, then it was decided connection is more important. We're going to make the gift at 100. We're going to make the receipt at $100. So within your own organizations, you can have challenges of the data not being the same and correct, that there's not one core source of truth. You may also have a challenge that the values aren't aligned. You may also have the challenge that the picture of the future is not the same. And so if those pieces are not aligned, of course you're going to have conflict. Of course, work is going to be really difficult and hard. The first step is to really align those three things.
Yeah, I think that last point probably really resonates for a majority of people on this call. It's based off of what we see when people come to give effect and how we try to support them in aligning. So thank you so much. And just a quick reminder, we will be opening up um, questions for the audience in just a moment. And so I see we have a few coming in, but I just wanted to remind you all that now is the time. Now is the time to add. So any of those burning questions.
One thing that I'll say in the questions, you can ask about future proofing your organizations. If you're also curious about future trends impacting your particular work. My staff jokes that my party trick is having an idea about the future of anything that impacts the sector or a place to send you to. And so please, anything that you're curious about what's coming next for the social sector, would love to hear your thoughts. And also, if you're noticing trends, what are the things that you're seeing? Share that as well, because we all have a unique perspective of what's possible and what's coming next.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, I'd love to hear if any of our audience members have any thoughts on that as well. Great. We'll kick it off with one question here. What are some practical ways nonprofits are actually using AI today? So I know you touched on AI a little bit earlier in your talk, but I feel like this is probably on everyone's mind as you can't go anywhere without hearing the term or seeing the term AI.
Yeah, AI is transforming absolutely everything about the sector. AI has passed the Turing test, which is the ability for it to do human-like thinking. And I think in many cases is better than many of us in that way. It also, at this moment, AI is the worst that it will ever be. So I think that's the part to come in mind when you're starting to use tools, or if you tried to use an AI tool last year and you were like, this is confusing and this doesn't work. It looks completely different now than it did at that moment. Um, I think the part that is important with sort of exponential knowledge and that kind of growing, um, doctors used to get trained at medical school, and that medical knowledge in the 1950s would last for the next 50 years. So you could go to medical school and get trained, and it would serve you your entire career. And now medical knowledge doubles every 73 days. It's actually probably faster than that because I got that stat a couple of months ago. There is no way that a human being can stay on top of that pace of change. And what many people will say is, yes, sure, there's a lot of medical knowledge. We should use AI for that. But if I'm getting bad news, I want to get that from a human doctor. There was a study that said that ChatGPT scored 21% higher than physicians for quality of responses to patients, and it was 41% more empathetic, which is like absolutely the most hurtful thing that I can think of, that ChatGPT is more empathetic than a human doctor. That is not surprising given all of the things that are on doctors' plates. That you like have 5 minutes to run into a room and you're trying to figure out very complex things and sort of jump ahead. And I think what that means for the doctors is, how do we partner with AI so that it can help us have more time and space to do the human activities? I would say it's the same for the nonprofit sector. So how do we utilize these tools to systematize our work, to do things that are repetitive, to free you up for human work? So AI cannot create anything new. It can only tell us what we already know. Most of the work in the social sector is about finding new solutions to problems. And so we need human brains to be able to find new solutions to problems. We also need humans for relationships and connection, and caring for each other. And so within each of your organizations, I'd encourage you to think about how to build AI super teams where each staff member becomes 10 times more effective by using AI tools. And so you're harnessing the brilliance of that person, but you're using a set of tools so that their impact is so much bigger. I do not know one overstaffed nonprofit in the country or in the world. And so we can use AI tools to beef up that staffing nature. We did this work at FutureGood about a year ago, where I tasked all of my staff to figure out how to use AI tools to 10x their capability. And they systematized a ton of things. They're using a whole different suite of tools for those repetitive sort of tasks. And I used to be the only futurist at FutureGood. So we had 6 staff members that supported me to do more work. And we hit the natural limit of what Trista doing more work could physically look like. And with those AI tools, what we did is expanded that capacity, where that 6-person staff team now supports 13 visioning strategists that all do the futurism work that I do. So it's the same staff, but they are supporting a lot more work that's happening in the world. And I think within each of your organizations, using those AI tools, you really can transform your capacity to do good in the world.
Wow, you just covered so much. And it is incredible to think that AI is the worst it'll ever be right now. And like you said, it's impossible to keep up with all the changes, but really thinking about how can you partner and leverage its capabilities to make you better as a person, as an employee, as a nonprofit professional, as someone who's working towards a mission. So thank you for that. Um, we have a great question coming in from Emma Corey. How do you align your staff and board on the value of investing in future thinking tools and investments?
Yeah, I think some of it is practicing using that muscle. So many of us have not used a future thinking muscle since we were a little kid. When people are like, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" You know, that those sort of conversations are something that kids have a lot, but as adults, we don't talk about what is possible and what's next. And so we talked earlier about the icebreakers and that sort of thing. Start to bring those pieces in. Share the Future Good book with your board members, share it with your staff members. Expose them to things that are making the case for the future. When you're setting those Google alerts for your 5% for the future time, share those articles with people in your organization and say, hey, I saw this really interesting innovation that I think would impact the future of our work. Or we talk a lot about bright spots that exist around the world. Sometimes there's a saying the future is already here, it just isn't evenly distributed. And so we've hosted these things called field trips to the future, where we take a group of social sector folks someplace else in the world that's already living the future that you want to live in a particular community. So we took a group of foundations and nonprofits and elected officials from Minnesota to Sweden to see the future of an early childhood system. Like, what does it look like if you fully invest in kids? And being in that space allows people to see those possibilities. And so within your own organizations, how are you creating those bright spots and building that muscle yourself and helping people on your team do it as well?
Thank you so much. And this question comes in from Darby Hinckley. So I feel like maybe for many of our attendees today who haven't been exposed to futurism and what future thinking really is, this is a good question. How can we be sure what the future holds? Isn't it just educated guessing?
Everything is educated guessing. So futurism is not about a sort of crystal ball and me saying, here's exactly what the future is going to look like. It's about understanding the possibilities. And so when you get clear about those possibilities, there'll be bad ones and there's good ones. And our responsibility as nonprofits is to make it more likely that that good future is going to happen. And so following futurists, we share future trends at FutureGood all the time on our social media channels. It allows you to start to understand what those possibilities are and then make educated guesses and think about like when you do scenario planning, it isn't that there is one specific future or a million possible futures. We use a Oxford scenario planning model where there's 4 possible futures given the things that you care about. For each of those possible futures, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and what are the actions that you would take in that future? And what that allows you to do is before that future starts to happen, you know how you would show up. And then when you can see, oh, we're actually moving to this direction, you already have your actions, you already know how to harness that particular circumstance to get you to a future that you're really excited about.
Wonderful. Thank you. And this is going to be our last audience question. Let's see here. There's so many good to choose from. At what point should we share our future vision with funders and partners?
I think it's an amazing thing to stay in touch with foundations about your picture of the future. So I work closely with a number of foundations, and they say all we hear from our grantees is like how bad things are going to be, and we're not seeing a picture of the future. And what I tell the foundations is that's because that's what you ask them. You ask them what's broken and need to be fixed. You need to create the spaces where your grantees can use their radical imagination and dream about what's possible and dream about what's next. So funders are really hungry for a picture of what that future looks like. What we find for organizations that go through future proof and the visioning process is that that end picture of the future that you create is a phenomenal fundraising tool. You are telling funders, if you really invest in this organization, we're going to get to this future that we're super excited about a whole lot faster. And that is the best investment that a foundation can make. And so it is worth your time and energy thinking about what's possible and what's next.
Thank you so much. And just to answer just a couple quick questions, will we receive a copy of the recording? I'd love to share this with my leadership team. So yes, we'll be sending out access to the recordings by the end of the week. So please stay tuned and keep an eye out in your inbox for it. Um, and all right, so. Before we wrap up, I'd love to ask Trista just one final question. I know we touched on it a little bit, but maybe expand or add to it. If a nonprofit leader listening today wanted to take one practical step immediately to become more future ready, what would you suggest they do first?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. Set aside 5% of your time for the future. So put it on your calendar, like Tara said, set those Google alerts for future of whatever the topics are that you're interested in. There's something that happens when you use future of as a frame that it is often really positive articles. It's people dreaming about what's possible and what's next. And when you start to do this, you're going to notice patterns. You're going to notice things that are really important to your organization. And so you'll be in a board meeting and somebody will bring something up and you're like, oh, hey, that is an important thing. And here's how we're starting to think about it. It really helps you get ahead of the curve. Perfect. Well, I'll close us out. So another future is possible and it needs you. It needs you to have a long-term picture of the future that you want to create. It needs you to know what success looks like for your work. It needs you to spend time understanding future trends that impact both the causes and the communities that you care about. And it needs you to believe that a more beautiful and equitable future is possible and that you're willing to do the work to make it happen. The future is not some terrible thing that's coming towards us. You create it with the decisions that you make today. So thank you for everything that you are doing to make tomorrow more beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trista. That was so thoughtful, grounding, and such a strong start to our summit. So, really appreciate that. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Before we transition to the next session, I just wanted to share two exciting announcements with you. So, first off, we are offering something we very rarely do here at Giveffect. If you book a strategy call with the Giveffect team, by March 31st, you'll receive free data migration plus $1,000 off your first year subscription if you decide to move forward by June 30th, 2026. And just to let you know, our strategy calls are not demos. They're actually working sessions where we help you think through your fundraising operations, volunteering, and systems in a practical way. You don't need to have completed your call by this date. However, it must be scheduled by then in order to be eligible for this offer. You can use the link on the screen, scan the QR code, or grab the link in the chat. We will also share this via email, so keep an eye in your email for that. And second, we are doing something fun throughout next. Each day, we are giving away coffee on us to 10 attendees. To enter, please follow Giveffect on LinkedIn. Find a next related post on our page, and in the comments, excuse me, and in the comments, tag Giveffect and share one thing you've learned or hope to learn using the hashtag Next2026. We will announce the winners at the end of the last session each day. So, coming up next at 1 p.m., one team, one system, how high-performing nonprofits eliminate silos. You'll hear from leaders at Habitat for Humanity of Kansas City across development, volunteering, and finance, sharing what actually changed when they moved from siloed teams to shared visibility. And if you've ever felt friction between departments, this session will show you what alignment can look like in practice. So, Zoom events is a little bit different than maybe some of the platforms you've been on previously. So, in order to join the next session, head back to the virtual lobby, click on the Sessions tab at the top of the screen, scroll down the agenda, and click Join on the next session. We're so glad you're here, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you so much.